Hello, and welcome to Wallace's Mysteries of Antiquities. In this series, we will explore together the enigmas of our distant ancestors and try to come to tentative conclusions about them. In this video, we'll be putting a 2,500-year-old mystery to bed. For the history of Egyptology, one description of the Great Pyramid has baffled the most learned individuals. That of Herodotus, who claimed the burial chamber of Khufu is deep below ground, where his sarcophagus rests on an island surrounded by water, channeled in from the Nile. Herodotus wrote the earliest descriptions of the pyramids by an outsider. He was a Greek historian who published 9 books called Histories in the 430s BC. Now, we cannot take his words as completely literal, as he seems to make little effort to distinguish between myth and folklore and real history, though he also had no real way of doing so. The part we're interested in is Book 2, chapters 124 to 127. Each are only really a paragraph. I will now read part of chapter 127. Quote, Cheops reigned, so the Egyptians said, for 50 years. At his death, he was succeeded by his brother Khephren, who bore himself in all respects like Cheops. Khephren also built a pyramid of a less size than his brothers. I have myself measured it. It has no underground chambers, nor is it entered like the others by a canal from the Nile, but the river comes in through a built passage and encircles an island in which they say Cheops himself lies. End quote. There have been many attempts to interpret this writing. Is Herodotus claiming that Khufu, who the Greeks called Cheops, is actually buried under Khafre's pyramid, who he called Khephren? Furthermore, in this one chapter, you get an idea of how muddied the writings of Herodotus really are, as he believes Khafre and Khufu are brothers. We're very certain now that he was his son. We now know the order of the pharaohs at this time was Khufu, then his son Djephre, then Khafre. Djephre and Khafre were brothers and both sons of Khufu. This family tree seems to have gotten muddied in the 2 millennia between these men and Herodotus. This could imply that this entire passage is actually about the tomb of Djephre, not Khufu, who almost certainly was entombed in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Some believe the river mentioned was in fact not the Nile, but actually the Milky Way, an astral or metaphorical river. This is usually proposed in conjunction with the air shaft's purpose being to let in these spiritual rivers, which may have held some importance to the resurrection and afterlife process. Now, I know very little about the religious beliefs of Khufu, so while that could be a plausible explanation of the shafts, the king's chamber hardly fits the rest of the description. Others have tried to interpret the known subterranean chamber in this way. They say this raised part may have been the island, and the mysterious shaft going east was what supposedly led in the Nile. It doesn't, it's a dead end, but either could have been planned to be longer, or again, was metaphorical dummy architecture. These are always very big stretches. The raised section doesn't remotely resemble an island, and the chamber appears unfinished and is no state to inter a king. Yet others propose that the true burial chamber of Khufu is yet to be discovered, and it really does look like this. Ground-penetrating radar has detected anomalies underneath both the Great and Khafre's pyramid, but in my opinion, these are more likely natural caves in the soft limestone. There is a known unexplored chamber above the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid. This may be a good candidate. It was discovered by muography scans and is yet to be explored, and we don't even have a good idea for its size and shape. What we can be sure, though, is that it does not let in the Nile. While Herodotus said he personally measured the pyramids, he almost certainly didn't go inside and would have simply recorded what was told to him by the locals. The pyramids were dangerous, dark, full of bats, snakes, and the only source of light being your torch was the same thing suffocating you as it burned your oxygen. I believe he was not describing Khufu's burial chamber, but someone else's. Take a look at this diagram. This is a small chamber that has been dug down, leaving a raised section in the middle where a sarcophagus was placed. There are also 4 pillars, or at least the remains of them. Egyptologists have found Herodotus' tomb. It's just not widely known, even by enthusiasts. Here's some pictures of the actual chamber during excavation by Zahi Hawass. You can see the raised central island and what remains of a pillar. The sarcophagus has a New Kingdom design, so it cannot be that of Khufu, though it does not mean the structure is New Kingdom, only the coffer. We'll come back to dating everything later. There are the remains of 4 pillars, one in each corner of the island, around which a deep channel is cut. In the center of the island, the sarcophagus itself rests within a central depression a couple of feet deep. When filled with water, this looks exactly like what Herodotus described. So what about that water? Notice I said when filled, not if filled. Take a closer look at this image I showed. That's water. This is what this space looks like today. This man is standing on that sarcophagus. You can see it under the water here in the left image. This room is still flooded and has been for ages. The water table of the Nile plateau seems to fluctuate wildly by tens of meters in only decades. This is a structure within the Giza complex that is so obscure it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page and only has a paragraph on the main complex page. It doesn't even get a mention on the complex map. It's located right here along the causeway to Khufu's pyramid. It's not open to the public in the same way that the pyramids are, but you can book time inside. It's called the Osiris Shaft. Most Egyptologists are of the strong opinion, and I agree with them, that this space is the tomb that was being described by Herodotus. Here's a quote from Zahi Hawass. Quote, "The Osiris Shaft, in my opinion, can be identified with the underground tomb surrounded by water brought by a canal that was mentioned by the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE." End quote. This burial chamber is in the bottom of a 35-meter deep, 3-layer structure. Within each layer lies their own mysteries, which is why if you search for the Osiris Shaft, you're more likely to be presented with alternative history than academic or even tourist information. I'm going to start where everyone must, at the entrance at the top, and work my way down to the burial chamber. There is a surface layer just under the causeway. Although the shaft is exposed to the sky, tourists enter the shaft through a small passageway on the side of Khufu's causeway. This passage will take you to a modern ladder, which will take you down to the first layer of the subterranean chambers. One descends the first ladder down just short of 10 meters to reach the first chamber. This deep shaft itself first came to the attention of Egyptologists, whose name is on screen, in 1945, though the locals had been using it as a swimming and water hole for ages. He, however, was not able to excavate or explore the shaft, as it was full of water all the way up to the upper shaft. The first chamber is roughly rectangular and featureless. It's 3 to 4 meters wide and 8.5 long. It has been carved into the bedrock, and hand chisel marks can be seen all over the walls. This space is left rough, and there is not an indication of finishing stones or anything of that matter that ever lined the walls. The walls are not even completely parallel to each other, and both the floor and ceiling slant upwards. The only feature in this room is the second shaft leading down. The second shaft is 13 meters deep and had a curious niche carved out of the side of it. Perhaps this niche was dug to aid in maneuvering the giant sarcophagi into place. Yes, plural. The second level is where things start to get a little strange, and where rampant alternative history speculation runs wild. But my subscribers know that this is going to be a grounded look at the anomalies here. It is a large central room with 8 niches cut out of the walls. 3 in the east, 3 in the west, and 1 both north and south. For some reason in this image, Hawass places north to the right, not the top. The leftmost one receives the shaft from the upper section, and the southernmost eastern niche contains the shaft to the 3rd level, but the other 6 appear to have been tombs. Zahi Hawass's paper, The Discovery of the Osiris Shaft at Giza, mentioned there were 4 sarcophagi found here, although only the 2 largest ones remain today. I assume the others are somewhere in the Cairo University, though I was not able to track them down. One of the missing coffers was the one here in Chamber C, which was in a recessed part of the floor and contains the remains of someone, as well as pottery and mummy parts, which have been dated to the New Kingdom. All of the coffins in this room have the style that firmly date them in the 26th dynasty. The second coffin in the next chamber is still there and is what gets the alternative history crowd going. This one is basalt and did not contain a body, but there was a large amount of 26th dynasty pottery found on the south side of it. Most intriguing, though, it is covered in a gooey black substance. This material has been tested and has been determined to be bitumen, which is a viscous petroleum mixture. Some suggest that this indicates that this had some industrial use, though Egyptians used tar and oil all the time, particularly with boats. Further analysis proved that this is refined oil. It's absolutely an industrial lubricant. Here you can see more of the black goo inside the coffin, as well as some pottery and bones that were found at the south side of it. To many, this is strong evidence for lost ancient technology, and I've seen many videos discussing it. Those videos conveniently never turn the camera around at the cubby across from it, which contains this: a 1930s Myers water pump used in the 1940s in an attempt to drain some of the shaft. It used the exact thick black oil found in the coffin and was placed on top of it. The oil came from the pump. It's modern, and the chemical analysis I mentioned proved it. Mystery closed. This image I showed of the inside of the box contains a wire from the same time period. Some say this can't be the source because it's also found on the underside of the lid. It looks like something exploded inside. But this entire room was submerged again, and oil floats in water, so it got everywhere. The other niche that still contains a sarcophagus is Chamber G in the northeast corner. This coffin is very unique. It is made out of a material called diasite and is the only artifact in Egypt made from it. It is not a local stone and likely came from somewhere near Turkey, though there are small deposits of it in Egypt. It's also covered in a layer of something which has been identified through spectral analysis to be mostly lead, zinc, and iron. It's white paint, so this coffin was once a brilliant white. Strangely, although the style of the coffin still firmly places it in the 26th dynasty, dating of the coffin indicates that it was carved well before that, even possibly before the Old Kingdom. How can this be? I can explain it quite easily, actually. For one, no samples were taken. A handheld device was used in the field, which is less accurate than in a lab, but furthermore, let's explain the process named on screen. Crystals of granite and similar materials are full of holes where electrons can get trapped. When exposed to the sun or heat, like it would be when being carved, this bleaches the rock and removes all the extra electrons. Then, when put in darkness, electrons slowly seep in and get trapped from the surrounding materials as well as deep space. The fuller the lattice, the longer the stone has been buried. But look closer. What do uranium, rubidium, thorium, and potassium all have in common? Radioactivity can greatly speed up the capture of electrons, and that's what's happening here. When a Geiger counter was used on this coffin, it was revealed to be the single most radioactive thing ever found in Egypt. This, again, gets the alternative history people riled up, but lots of rocks are naturally this radioactive. For example, Grand Central Station in New York City is so radioactive just because it's made of granite that if it were a nuclear power plant, it'd be in violation of radiation level guidelines. This is what threw off the dating and caused a New Kingdom coffin to appear thousands of years older than it is. Finally, there is a final 7.5-meter shaft to the lower section. Within this shaft, 7 regular rectangular niches have been cut. Hawass theorized that these were used to place wooden beams to aid in lowering the giant basalt sarcophagus. At the bottom of the shaft is the flooded burial chamber. It may appear from the diagram that there were 2 sarcophagi in there, but the lower one is actually the lid, which blocked access until moved. This is where dating becomes confusing again. The coffin is very much in the style of the 26th dynasty like all the others. However, in this lower level, other artifacts that can be found dated from the Old Kingdom, specifically the 6th dynasty, about 200 years after the Great Pyramid construction. Therefore, these could not have been the remains of Khufu or his immediate successor. This scarab is confidently from the 26th dynasty, but most of the other artifacts are late Old Kingdom, and the oldest materials were pottery. Upon moving the lid to the coffer, a hieroglyphic was found on the ground, which officially named the place the text on screen, or the House of Osiris, Lord of Rasta, where Rasta is the underground tunnels. This cemented for Hawass the purpose of this room as a symbolic tomb for Osiris, who rose from the waters. There is a 6-meter tunnel cut to the west wall of this chamber, but it's a dead end. Hawass said he, quote, sent a boy through the tunnel only to find it closed off. I hope this is a translation error and it was a young man, not a child, as he also refers to lowering a boy on a rope to dive through the chamber before it was pumped. This was the 1990s, not Vice's time. So that's the tomb now believed to be what Herodotus described as Khufu's tomb. I agree with Mr. Hawass's interpretation of the evidence that the bottom chamber was created by the Old Kingdom and may or may not have held a person. The second level was dug by the New Kingdom so that important individuals could rest in the presence of Osiris, who became far more important in the New Kingdom. It seems the second layer was an actual tomb, though we have no idea who any of them were, and the lower section may or may not have been symbolic. Thank you for listening. Respectfully discuss my ideas or post your own in the comments, and subscribe to continue to explore our distant ancestors with me.